I'm going to be honest with you guys. By every metric, I was a shitty Marine. In my 4-year career, I'd never scored higher than a second-class PFT. I never went to my MOS's advanced school. I was NGP'd twice and non-rec'd for promotion more times than I could count. I barely picked up Lance Corporal, and everybody gets promoted to Lance Corporal. According to my squad leader, section leader, platoon sergeant, and company first sergeant, I have an attitude and a motivation problem. They weren't wrong. I don't truly know why I would behave the way I did. Maybe it was just a lack of maturity. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17, trying to get out of a bad situation back home. I had a troubled childhood, and I had hoped the Marines would be a way for me to move forward. Well, as it turns out, people with troubled childhoods will typically have troubled adulthoods. Every shitty thing I did as a kid, I did as a Marine. Drinking, stealing, getting into fights, being disrespectful to authority figures. Typical bullshit you'd expect from a shitbag terminal lance. By 3.5 years in, my leadership had given up on me. Whatever, I thought. I only had 6 months left anyway. Our unit was getting ready to set out on its yearly field exercise at a training area a few hundred miles away from our base. I'm not going to name what unit or base I was at, or the training area for the sake of operational security. I guess old habits die hard. As I expected, as soon as we arrived at the training area, I was placed on camp tax. And for those of you not in the know, camp tax is essentially where the unit would place all the shitbags, such as myself, to do bitch work around the cantonment area. Picking up trash, cleaning toilets, working in the chow hall, and other such tasks. What I didn't expect was to be placed on AHA watch. You see, AHA means Ammunition Handling Area, and in accordance with USMC regulations, it's far as fuck away from everything else. I, along with 19 other independently minded Marines, were given 2-man tents and several boxes of MREs, and were placed in a 7-ton, heading several miles away from cantonment. And what makes AHA watch so shitty is, aside from the fact that it's in the middle of nowhere, which says a lot because the training area itself was also in the middle of nowhere, is that we had to sleep outside. This base was in the mountains, and it got cold as hell at night. There was no hot chow, no showers, no bathrooms aside from the overflowing porta shitters, and most pertinent to me, no PX. I had only brought out 1 pack of Marlboros before we had left our base, and I had 0 snacks. I would have to sustain myself solely on MREs for the next month and a half, not to mention the fact that my only company would be almost 24 shitbags and all the wild goats that lived out in those mountains. On the ride over, I pondered what I could have done to be condemned to this forsaken duty. There was a long list of things to choose from. Was it because I fell asleep on duty? Or was it because I got kicked off the last rifle qual range for being a safety violator? Was it because I wrote "fuck Poggies" on the wall of the radio battalion's barracks? I concluded that it was probably a combination of all three. As soon as we got to the AHA, a wide dirt field inundated with green shipping containers filled with various types of ammunition, we quickly set up our tents. As soon as we were done, we were put to work unloading the containers. Alpha Company had their first range in a week, so obviously we had to get their ammunition ready now. After several hours of toiling, we finally finished, and I shambled back to my tent to unwind. This was my daily routine for the next few weeks. Wake up, Shave, eat chow, remove ammunition from the shipping containers, unload spent shells and cartridges from the backs of JLTVs and 7 tons, load the aforementioned ammunition into the aforementioned JLTVs and 7 tons, eat chow, go to sleep, rinse and repeat, day in and day out. Now, after one particularly grueling day of indentured servitude, all I wanted to do was smoke a cigarette. I'd been pretty good at rationing them, and I had one left. Sergeant Hart, the NCO in charge of the AHA, had promised us that he would get us a ride back to cantonments so we could go to the PX, so I could restock them. I walked back to my tent, and right away I knew something was wrong. My tent was open. I scurried over and looked inside. My cigarettes were gone. Fucking thieves, I thought. As I pondered what I was going to do, I heard laughter. I glanced over in the direction where it came from, and I saw Davidson standing in the smoking pit, smoking a cigarette. Now, I knew for a fact that he ran out of smokes a week ago, and no one here liked him enough to give him one of theirs. Rage growing inside of me, I stomped towards him. Now, in hindsight, I could have handled that better. I won't go into too much detail, but the situation ended with Davidson being taken back to cantonment to see the corpsman and me being put on firewatch all night. I was going to have firewatch for multiple hours every night for the rest of the time we were out there. Damn. Sergeant Hart made me the roving watch, so I had to walk around the perimeter of the AHA for 3 hours every night. This was a position he specifically created just for me. After a few nights of this, I was joined by Davidson. He ended up being alright. All he had was a black eye. He was going to join me every night on roving watch because he instigated our fight by stealing my cigarette. Now, it was a little awkward at first, having to spend several hours every night walking around in a circle with a guy I just knocked out, but after a while the awkwardness dissipated, and soon we were talking and laughing like old friends. Him bringing me a pack of Marlboros to make up for the one he stole certainly helped, though. A few days after we were condemned to firewatch, something peculiar happened. A wild goat was found dead outside the AHA. The goat was discovered about 200 meters down the road from the AHA. It was a ghastly scene. It was all torn up. Its limbs were stripped of flesh almost down to the bone, and the strangest thing to me was that its head was missing. Because it was discovered on the road, everyone's first assumption was that it was hit by a truck. But that didn't make any sense. The speed limit on these roads was 15 miles per hour, and it was highly enforced by the chain of command. With how much the road winds and curves, I don't think any military vehicle could even go beyond 20 miles per hour. A truck hitting a goat at 15 miles per hour wouldn't do that kind of damage. After Davidson and I hauled the goat to the side of the road, everyone quickly forgot about it, writing it off as some strange anomaly. Things continued normally for a few more days, until another goat was discovered in the same state as the first. Now, someone postulated that there might be some sort of wolf or coyote in the area, and that's what had killed the goats. That would make more sense than our first theory, as it did look like some sort of animal had gotten to the goat. But like our first theory, there were problems with it. According to our wildlife safety brief, the goats living in the training area were an invasive species with no natural predators. The state had to occasionally bring in hunters to thin their numbers. Someone else suggested that perhaps a hunter was responsible for the goat's death, but we quickly dismissed that idea. Hunters weren't allowed to hunt while there were units training. This went on for the next few days. Dead goats, all mutilated beyond recognition, were turning up around the AHA. Every time they were discovered a few dozen meters closer. I suggested to Sergeant Hart that we should call the COC and tell them what was going on, but he flatly refused. Apparently, Sergeant Hart got into some trouble because of the fight I got into, and now company leadership was questioning his competence. He was up for promotion to staff sergeant and didn't want another incident out here to jeopardize that. I tried to protest, but I stopped myself. I knew from experience that an argument between a sergeant and a lance corporal only ended one way. So more days pass, more maimed goats, their corpses inching closer and closer to our sanctuary. During our watch, Davidson and I would try to see what was causing the depopulation of the local goat community, but we never could. It was too dark and our tiny flashlights only shone so far, and our NVGs were back in armory and cantonment. It was a complete mystery to us. Until one night. During our watch, we were talking, just shooting the shit, when we heard a shrill scream. It sounded just like a person. We both jumped and spun toward the direction of the scream. We both let out a sigh of relief to see that it was just a goat, standing on a hill, illuminated by the moonlight, about 20 meters away from us. Those old YouTube videos are right. A goat's scream sounds just like a human. Davidson started to approach the goat to scare it off. They weren't allowed in the AHA. As he was halfway to the goat, yelling at it to go away, the goat was suddenly pulled away behind the hill by something that we didn't see. Davidson did an about face and sprinted back to where we were standing and past me, leaving me there, frozen in terror. The goat screamed and screamed until eventually it was silenced, presumably by whatever had taken it. I stood there frozen in place, too stunned by what I had just witnessed to move. My trance was only broken when Davidson grabbed me from behind and tried to pull me back into the AHA. He must have realized that I hadn't been running with him, and he came back for me. We immediately woke up Sergeant Hart and told him what we saw. He didn't believe us, or at least not completely. He told us that it must have been a wolf or a coyote or a bear, and that it wouldn't bother us because they were afraid of people. Now he knew damn well that none of those animals lived out here. He just didn't care. He told us to get back on watch, or he would make this last week we were here a living hell. So me and Davidson begrudgingly went back on post. But this time we didn't talk or joke around. We just lay in the prone, our unloaded rifles pointing in the direction of our unseen enemy. We found what was left of the goat the next morning, just behind the hill. All day the next day we begged Sergeant Hart not to put us on watch outside the perimeter of the AHA. We argued that it was unnecessary from a security standpoint, as there was a tall fence that surrounded the whole place. He told us that he didn't care, and that it was our punishment for fighting each other and embarrassing him. We then offered to stand firewatch the whole night, every night, for the last few days we were here, just behind the fence. Me and Davidson both sighed in relief when he agreed to those terms. Now, it was exhausting having to stand a full 8-hour shift every night for the rest of the week, but it was worth it. We had hoped what Sergeant Hart had said was true, and that whatever that was, it would be afraid of people and not try to enter the AHA. It never did, but we were glad we would be leaving in a few days, so we wouldn't have to find out if it would. Things were looking up. The field exercise was over. I had survived being out in the wilderness for a month and a half, and as soon as I got back to our base, I would be starting the process of getting out of the Marines. Things were good. But everything went to shit on that last night. The night had started pretty good. Sergeant Hart decided that after a month of constantly being on watch, we had learned our lesson, and he gave us the night off. I went to bed that night, happy to be getting the first full 8 hours of sleep since we got out there. My slumber was interrupted by something I'd become accustomed to: Sergeant Hart's angry screaming. "What do you mean he's gone?" Sergeant Hart barked at the young PFC. "I don't know, Sergeant. I looked inside his tent for him for his watch and he was gone." The PFC stuttered back. And Private Locke had a pretty hard time in the Marine Corps. And that's saying something coming from me. Locke had trouble adjusting to the rigors of life in the infantry, and to make a long story short, he just couldn't do it. Since he had arrived at the unit a few months ago, he was the constant victim of bullying and hazing, and to cope with this, he turned to self-medication. He popped on a piss test right before he came out here, and he was due to be kicked out with an other than honorable discharge when he returned. According to one of the other Marines present, Locke had mentioned that he was going AWOL and to catch a flight back home. The Marine thought he was joking and didn't think anything of it. But now, a few hours later, Locke's tent was empty and his day pack was gone. "Great. This is the last fucking thing I needed," Sergeant Hart growled. He then turned to me and said, "You, Davidson, and PFC dumbass here are going to find him and bring him back." I immediately objected. "Sergeant, you can't be serious. It's the middle of the night, it's dark as fuck out, and we don't know which way he went. We need to call this in." I didn't mention the real reason I didn't want to go, because I knew he still didn't believe me. "Oh, fuck no," Sergeant Hart snapped. "If I call this in to the COC, I'm fucked, which by extension means you're all fucked. You see, the shit rolls downhill." Now, I doubted that any of this could be blamed on the rest of this, aside from the guys who previously stood firewatch and didn't stop him from leaving, and the guy who heard Locke mention he was leaving and didn't say anything. For the first time in my Marine Corps career, I was entirely blameless for a bad situation. Sergeant Hart could tell I knew this and he sighed. "Look, he couldn't have gone that far, and if I had to guess, the idiot probably took the main road back towards Cantonment. If you move quickly, you'll catch him. I can't go back because I'm the NCO in charge. I can't leave the rest of the Marines here unattended. And for all I know, if I leave, more people would run off." Sergeant Hart gave me a pleading look. "And aside from myself, you're the most senior guy here. I trust you to get this done." Now, in hindsight, I shouldn't have let that convince me to go. I should have grabbed the radio myself and called it in, and let Hart get fucked over, but I didn't. Throughout my time in the Marines, I have always been treated, deservedly, as an incompetent individual who couldn't be trusted with any sort of responsibility. So having a sergeant give me an actual important task and tell me he trusted me to complete it convinced me. After all that time, despite all my shitbaggery, I still had some sense of motivation. So myself, Davidson, and Scott, the PFC who discovered that Locke was missing, sent out down the dirt road back towards Cantonment, the route Sergeant Hart had believed Locke had gone. Davidson had agreed to go with me because he figured that there was strength in numbers. That whatever was out there killing the goats could have killed us all in the AHA, but didn't. because it just had been afraid of a large group of people. Scott came with us because he was a boot and would do whatever the hell we told him to do. Sergeant Hart told us that if we didn't find Locke within an hour, we would call him in on the 152, and then he would radio it as a last resort. At the time, that felt reasonable. As we made our way down the road, me and Davidson kept our heads on a swivel, on the lookout not only for Locke, but whatever ungodly nightmare that may be lurking in the shadows. It was a cold night like always, and for once the sky was clear of clouds. It had almost been an hour since we left, and all three of us were ready to call the sergeant and tell him we had failed. I brought the radio to my ear and pressed the key-in button. Echo 5 Hotel, this is Echo 3 Tango, radio check, I said into the radio. Static. Echo 5 Hotel, this is Echo 3 Tango, radio check, I said again. More static. Echo 5 Hotel, this is... I was cut off by 3 loud beeps emitted from the radio. I looked at the radio's display to see the bar representing the radio's battery life was just a small sliver. Ah, hell, I exclaimed angrily. I exchanged a glance with Davidson. Did you happen to bring an extra battery? I asked. He gave me an annoyed look. You're the one carrying the radio. You be the one in charge of having batteries. I sighed. He was right. Damn it, the first time I was ever entrusted with something important, and I already fucked up the most basic thing. No wonder why I kept getting non-wrecked. Well, we should probably head back, Scotty piped up. Sergeant Hart is expecting us to call him soon, and if he doesn't hear from us, he'll assume something happened. If we run, we could probably get back in 20 minutes. He's right, Davidson chimed in. If Sarge doesn't hear back from us, he'll be more pissed than before. I reluctantly agreed. I knew Sergeant Hart would be angry that we couldn't find Locke, but at that point, I didn't care. I was getting out in a few months, and soon all of this would just be a shitty memory to add my collection of shit memories. All right, boys, let's go. I was cut off by the shrill shriek that pierced through the night air. All three of us turned and faced the direction of that noise. Standing on top of a small hill adjacent to the road, illuminated by the moonlight, was Locke. He looked ragged and dirty, like he had just gotten out of a 2-week field op with 0 rest, and his uniform was torn to shreds and covered in blood. He was panting and gasping for air, like he had just run a marathon, and he on his knees, like he had just crawled up on the other side of the hill. "Locke, you dumbass boot," I said, ignoring his disheveled appearance. "Where the hell have you been? We've been looking everywhere for you," I growled at him. I really don't know what had come over me. Perhaps it was all the anger and frustration building up over my entire career, compounded by the month and a half spent out in the field, finally boiling over. I laid into Locke. "When we get back to the AHA, I'm personally going to fuck you up. Then Sergeant Hart's going to fuck you up. And when we get back to cantonment, I'm going to..." My tirade was cut off by the animal that pounced on Locke. That's the best way I can describe it. An animal. Although it didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. If I had to describe it in greater detail, I say it was a cross between multiple different animals. You see, it had the head of a bat, the body of a man, and the claws of a mountain lion. Claws that were currently tearing into Private Locke's torso and ripping out his spine. Davidson and I immediately booked it. We ran back down the road towards the AHA. After about 100 meters, I realized that Scott wasn't with us. He must have done what I did the first time I encountered this thing and froze up. I turned back just in time to see the creature decapitate him. I gagged and tried to resist the urge to vomit, which was not helped by the fact that this was the fastest I had ever run in my life. "Where's Scott?" Davidson panted. "It fucking killed him," I gasped back. "Hart should have let us bring our fucking rifles," Davidson angrily exclaimed. Davidson tried to convince Sergeant Hart to let us bring our rifles and some ammunition, but he refused. He didn't want to risk us losing them or having a neglect discharge. He insisted that if there was something out there, it probably wouldn't bother us. He was a sergeant, so, he knew better than us. It felt like we were running for hours, but in reality, it must have only been a few minutes. I could see the lights of the armor depot, and we were so close. I figured that if we made it back, we would be safe, because it never tried to get into the AHA before. Maybe it did fear large groups of people. We just didn't bring enough with us. I noticed in my peripheral vision that Davidson had fallen behind me a bit. Davidson was not a good runner. The whole reason he was on AHA duty was because he failed the PFT. After a few more minutes of running, he fell to his knees, gasping for air. "Oh my God, fuck," he panted. "I can't go on. Hell, man, I can't breathe." I stopped and screamed at him. "Davidson, you gotta get the hell up, man. Come on, we're almost there." I can't breathe." He looked up at me with a pleading look. Throw me on your back and carry me." I looked down at him and assessed the situation. Davidson was a big dude, and I was a pretty scrawny dude. Carrying him would slow me down tremendously. There was still just under a kilometer between us and the AHA. There was a slim chance I could get back to the AHA with him on my back, but there was also a chance that I wouldn't. I looked down the road, and the bat-human hybrid was sprinting towards us. Even from a few hundred meters away, I could see its blood-soaked fangs. We had a head start on it only because it spent a few minutes devouring Scott's corpse. I was very winded at this point, and I realized that if I wanted to survive, I would need another head start. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I left Davidson behind. My leadership was right. I was a terrible Marine. I'd done the one thing Marine is never supposed to do. I left another Marine behind to die to save my own life. Davidson kept screaming my name as I sprinted away from him. After I made it a few hundred meters away, he abruptly fell silent. I dashed through the front gate of the AHA, almost knocking over a very angry Sergeant Hart. I didn't stop to listen to whatever bullshit he was about to spew at me. I headed straight for the main radio. I pushed the boot radio operator to the side, picked up the microphone, and without any radio etiquette in mind whatsoever, I screamed help over and over again until I passed out. I was later told that I passed out from heat exhaustion, but based on the bruise on the back of my skull and the migraines that I still suffer to this day, I suspect Sergeant Hart bludgeoned me over the head with his rifle. My plea over the radio got some attention. When I woke up, I was in a naval hospital. As soon as I was awake, a nurse came in and told me to stay put, and that someone was going to speak with me. Before I could ask her for more information, she turned around and walked out. I tried to get up, but that's when I realized I was handcuffed to the bed. A few minutes later, a man in a suit entered the room. I don't think I'm allowed to go into full detail about what we spoke about, but what I can tell you is that officially, Private David Locke, Private First Class Lewis Scott, and Lance Corporal Matthew Davidson were killed by unexploded ordnance when they wandered off into the training area. I was told that I would be added to the casualty list if I didn't sign some papers saying that this was the case, and that I wouldn't speak about what I had experienced that night. I was told that everyone else present at the AHA was signing similar papers. I had no choice. All he told me about the creature I saw was that they were aware of its existence and that the situation was under control. I left the Marine Corps a few months after that, and by the grace of God, I somehow got out with an honorable discharge. I tried to forget that night and move on with my life. I started college, got a part-time job. I even took up reading as a hobby, which is something I never thought I'd do. This was all several years ago, and I thought I moved past that night and my time in the Marines as a whole, but recent events changed that. I kept in contact with a few of the guys who were there that night. Surprisingly, most are still in the fleet and are now NCOs. We didn't really talk about what happened, but most of them didn't really get the whole story. The whole real story anyway. A few months ago, someone posted an obituary in our group chat. It was for Staff Sergeant Daniel Hart. According to the obituary, he was killed in a training accident at the same base where all this shit went down. At first, I thought it was karma at work. After all, he was the one who sent me and my friends to our deaths so that we wouldn't get in trouble. But a few weeks later, I saw on Facebook that another one of the Marines who was there that night died. According to the memorial post on Facebook, he had died from a congenital heart defect. Hell, I couldn't believe that. That Marine in question was a PT stud, and I doubted he could have been in the Marines for as long as he was without any symptoms showing. As the weeks went on, I kept seeing obituaries and memorial posts popping up, all for the guys who were at the AHA that night. The causes of death were all crazy things: car accidents, training accidents, undiagnosed medical conditions, stuff like that. But by my count, I'm the only one left, which is why I'm writing this. See, I don't think I have much time left. For the past few days, I've been locked in my room. I'm afraid to go outside. I'm being watched. From my window, I can occasionally see a black van drive by, and I know it's the same one every time from the license plate, and I swear I could hear a helicopter fly by every so often. Helicopters have never flown by my apartment before last week. Now I'm praying to God that this is all just one big coincidence, and that I'm just losing my mind. What I do know that is, if this is all real, I'm not going to let them make my death look like an accident. I'm perfectly healthy. I don't have any dangerous hobbies, and my job isn't dangerous. I'm not planning on hurting myself. If they come for me, I'm going to fight. They won't be able to make it look like an accident.